Hello, I'm Tom Loftus, Senior Investment Analyst with Plan Pilot, and joining me today is Hal Bjornsson of JP Morgan, and the topic of discussion will be target date funds. Hal, before we get into any of the questions, would you mind briefly giving us an introduction of yourself and sharing your role at JP Morgan?
Certainly. I am a client portfolio manager in multi-asset solutions at JP Morgan. That is a unit that manages our target date strategies, and I spend a lot of time talking to plan sponsors, consultants, and advisors about how to think about what should be in a 401k menu, thinking about target date strategies, providing investment updates. And I've been in this business on the defined contribution side now for probably 20 years.
For the average plan participant who may not know what a target date fund is, can you provide a high-level overview of target date funds and how they work?
Sure. So the industry got behind the idea of helping plan participants in a 401k automatically diversify. So instead of a plan participant having to look at the investment options and think about how much do I want in stocks, how much do I want in bonds, how should that mix change over time, a target date series does that. I invest in a target date fund. The mix is set for me so that I don't have to think about what percentage should be in stocks, bonds, or other things. And as I age, as I continue to work and save for retirement, it adjusts. It might get more conservative as it gets closer and closer to retirement, with the idea of it focusing on the target date of retirement.
JP Morgan has done a terrific job shaping and refining its glide path over the years. At a high level, what factors and considerations are taken into account in glide path construction?
I can tell you what we did, and that is we looked at how people in a 401k plan are saving. How much do they save? Do they take loans? Do they take money out of retirement? Are they saving 5%, 10%? And that information we incorporated into what we believe makes sense from an asset allocation perspective. So we believe it's really about thinking about balancing the risks, making sure we understand how participants are saving for retirement and incorporating that knowledge into a glide path so that if I am 25 years old, I probably should have a lot of exposure to risk assets so my money grows. As I get into the middle years, I have more money in there, and in some cases people borrow from that account. We should take that into account. Not necessarily condoning behavior where people have to take the money out, but recognizing it. And then as I get closer to retirement and I've built up a lot of assets there, I probably don't want too much risk at a year or two before retirement. So adjusting that allocation is, again, an important part of the mix as you think about what goes into the glide path. And then on top of all that, it's really about thinking about, from an institutional perspective, what is the best mix? What is the way to diversify assets to provide for better risk-adjusted returns?
What are the key differentiators of JP Morgan's approach to target date versus others?
The big differences are, one, who runs the money. We sit inside of Multi-Asset Solutions, a team that's been managing money for defined benefit plans, endowments, foundations, going back probably over 46 years. So that's one difference. And then two, with that kind of team and experience, we have made a point from the inception of these strategies to look at how people save for retirement and incorporating that information into our target date strategies. And then the third thing I would say that differentiates us from many of our peers is that we really do think about and revisit, is this the best asset allocation? We revisit our assumptions about the markets every year. We look at participant behavior, and we're constantly, every year we run through simulations of that glide path, running through 10,000 participants over 25 different scenarios. So you end up with literally 250,000 tests of how this strategy is working to see if we should be adjusting things. And I think those are the things that differentiate us from competitors. It's the heritage of managing money as fiduciaries. It's looking at participants and then finally testing our assumptions and revisiting them every year.
Within any target date series, when you pull back the covers, there's a suite of underlying funds that in aggregate shape the asset allocations of the target date fund glide path. Two approaches that we've seen in the industry are using an underlying menu of funds managed internally, in your case by JP Morgan, or taking a multi-manager approach, bringing in strategies from outside managers and putting them into your own investment vehicle. What do you see as the pros and cons of these various approaches?
So I guess if I, as a target date manager, didn't have access to asset managers internally that would meet what I felt were the needs of that diversified glide path. In other words, I don't have managers that run an international fund that I think is competitive, or I want exposure to a small cap value manager and we don't have that capability. I can see why people look to external managers. The value that we see in using our proprietary strategies is that we have a broad palette to choose from. We can look at 400 different managers because of the way JP Morgan has built out its asset management business. So that when you look at the mix that's under the hood, to your point, we're looking at managers that have very different strategies, even within large cap managers, large capitalization stocks. You might have one manager that uses a bottom-up approach looking at stock by stock, and another manager might use quantitative or behavioral research to pick those stocks. They're very different, and yet they're both large cap. So that is, from our perspective, actually a competitive advantage that we have so much to choose from. And then the final thing I would say is, we've worked with these managers for a long time. We know a lot of them really well. So having a deep understanding of how different managers will work in different markets, I think is harder to get when you're using outside managers.
Given the uniqueness of target date funds and the role that they serve in plans, what do you believe is critical for plan sponsors to evaluate as they're selecting a target date fund series for inclusion in their plan? And as a follow-up to that question, what are some tips that you have for plan sponsors in monitoring their target date fund series on an ongoing basis?
That's probably one of the most important questions to ask, right? How do you figure out what's the best target date strategy? And the Department of Labor, actually, I guess 2 or 3 years ago now maybe, came out with what they called target date tips. And one of the things they said was, look at your plan participants. Look at the demographics of your plan. And that's where we believe people should start. You should look at how your people save, what their ages are, when they retire, or if they leave. That's the first place to start in picking a manager. From there, you can look at whether you want a strategy that's more aggressive or more conservative. You also want to think about in your own plan whether you have something like a defined benefit plan and whether that influences what kind of target date manager you have. But really it starts with, what does my plan population look like? And then working with an advisor consultant, figure out what the best options are to screen. And then you're looking at, in those situations, how those strategies have done over a period of time, what their risk-adjusted performance has been. What are their objectives? Do they align with what I'm trying to achieve for my participants? What do the fees look like? And then, importantly, how does that target date manager measure success? What are they trying to achieve? If my desired outcome as a plan sponsor is to get as many people to the finish line with income replacement, does that align with the goals of that strategy? If I'm trying to be aggressive and maximize the pot of money people have at retirement and in retirement, do I have a target manager that meets that objective? I think the issue that the Department of Labor was trying to get at was that years ago, many plan sponsors opted to use whatever the target date manager was that was on the record-keeping platform. There weren't a lot out there. There wasn't a long track record. That was the way a lot of people made those decisions. Fast forward, we know a lot more about the track record of these strategies, and incorporating what my people do in saving for retirement is really the first step. To your second question, I apologize for running on here. In terms of monitoring the strategies, I think having an investment policy statement and working with a team like yours and monitoring these strategies and making sure that the manager that I'm with is doing what I expect them to do in different markets, and looking at making sure that manager tenure is there. They haven't had a lot of change in staff. And then any changes in the underlying strategies make sense, and that those are able to be articulated. And then I can understand the process, and I can understand where the performance is coming from.
Hal, thank you again for being here with us today and sharing your insights. And for our audience, if you're interested in learning more about target date funds, we encourage you to reach out to a Plan Pilot consultant.